Let's pray as we start. Father, I pray that as we come again to your word, Lord, that these ancient prophecies again would be alive and fresh to us. That we would hear from you and see the truth of your word in the context it was written and to the people it was written to. And that understanding it, we might see the truths that stretch through time and speak to our lives today. Give us wisdom and discernment, we pray. And may your Holy Spirit illuminate the text that we might see your glory evermore. Amen. Amen. Okay, so we're in Isaiah 23. We have been doing a lot of oracles to a lot of nations over a lot of weeks. And the earlier oracles, as you recall, were more end-time stuff. He started off by basically saying, I'm the God of the nations, and look at what's going to happen to these nations ultimately. Why would you trust in them when this is their end fate? And then when the new section began, and he went back to some oracles, he then started to deal with the more immediate future of the nations. It's as if there was the hypothetical question of, well, okay, so these nations will all end up destroyed in the end, but maybe they can help us now. And there is this series of oracles to nations concerning more immediate, not completely immediate always, but more immediate issues. And the last of these for now is... when we hit chapter 24, we're hitting a whole new section. Oh, pardon me. A whole new section. And so this is the last of the sequence of oracles that we've been going through. And it ends with an oracle concerning Tyre. The nation of Tyre. A nation that was by the sea. A nation that was famous for its being merchants, for trading. They were the Wall Street of the day. They were the ones who had financial clout and power on all that came with it. You may be familiar with the name from a few New Testament passages. And really, the one who had the most to say about Tyre was Ezekiel. In Ezekiel 26, 27, and 28, there is a lot that is said about Tyre by Ezekiel. I did consider splitting this chapter into 2 weeks and taking some time to look at what some of the other prophets said, but I kind of want to just keep moving at this stage. But if you want to look at Ezekiel 26, 27, 28, you will see a lot of reference to Tyre there. It's very significant because in the same way that Isaiah linked Satan, more specifically the Antichrist, to Babylon, Ezekiel does something very similar with Tyre. And that's why it's quite a well-known passage. You'll also see stuff about Tyre in Amos 1, verses 9 to 10, and Zechariah 9, verses 2 to 4. But we're going to stick with Isaiah and what he has to say. So let's have a look. The oracle concerning Tyre. Wail, O ships of Tarshish, for Tyre is laid waste, without house or harbour. From the land of Cyprus it is revealed to them. So Tyre were a powerful nation. They had many trading ships. They had a lot of power militarily. And while they are going about doing their business, there is this declaration, and there is to be wailing or lamenting of the ships of Tarshish. Now, many people here debate over which Tarshish it is. There were at least 3 places that were named Tarshish. And the result of that is that people are saying, well, which one's he referring to? In fact, they've recently found a 4th one as well. So maybe there's actually 4. But it seems like it's a little bit like when many of the original settlers of the modern state of America came over, a lot of the places that they named in America were names that existed in England already. Like New York existed because there wasn't already a York in England, that kind of thing. And it seems as if the multiple Tarshishes weren't just coincidental, but they were deliberate. That Tarshish was a place of ships, a place of trading, a place by the sea. And so when they set up their own nation, their own colonies elsewhere, they would colonize different places. They would have different Tarshishes. So when you see the ships of Tarshish, whether it's referring to one of them or all of them, you're clearly looking at the ships that would do trading. And they are going to lament because Tyre, this place that was center to all of this trading, is laid waste, without house or harbor. In other words, the city itself is destroyed, but also with it, the harbor by which the trading was done has been destroyed as well. And so when the city comes to an end, the trading with it. It's interesting to note that they're actually away trading, and it seems that most of obviously the leaders, perhaps it's referring to, the key people, are in the land of Cyprus, presumably trading, at the time when they discover that their home city has been destroyed. Verse 2, be still, O inhabitants of the coast. The merchants of Sidon who crossed the sea have filled you. And on many waters your revenue was the grain of Shihor and the harvest of the Nile. You were the merchant of the nations. And what's being described here is simply that all along this coastline there are the people who live there. And they are going to be stilled. They are going to be affected. I think one thing we need to understand is this, and this I think will become really clear as we go through the passage. When Tyre falls, because it is so significant trading-wise, multiple other nations are affected as well. When recently the UK have been for years trying to get out of Europe, and it's finally happened over this last few weeks, and the arguments against and the arguments for its leaving have all been about trade. Well, if you leave, then it's going to affect us when trading here and there and what have you. You imagine if America fell. Now, obviously, if America was defeated militarily, that would affect a lot of people. But there would be other nations who trade, who rely on American goods, who interact in a merchant sense with America, who will be affected as well. And so what's happening here is these other nations are being affected because Tyre was the hub. It was the center of trading with all these other nations along the coastline, right? Why is that relevant? Why is that important? Because every single one of us is significant. Every single one of us has a network of people who love us and people who we love, people who we help, people who help us. No man, as is famously said, John Donner, wasn't it, I think, originally, no man is an island. We are not isolated. We are created in the image of God, and God, Yahweh, Jehovah, has existed from eternity past in three persons. God, by his very nature, is a relational God. And we, created in his image, we are relational people. We are designed, created to interact. And sure, we're different. Some of us are more extroverted, some are more introverted, some of us like to interact in different ways, but nonetheless, we all rely on interaction to some degree. And even if you want to sit at home all day and do nothing other than watch TV and eat pizza, you still rely on the interaction of the person who delivers your pizza and the interaction of the characters or the actors who are playing the characters on the TV to have that interaction. We all interact. And my point in this is simply saying, when we sin, were we to fall, the impact is widespread, far greater than we realize. The people who know us as Christians, if we sin, if we fall into sin, these people are going to be impacted by that. Enemies will rejoice. Some will be, celebrating, oh, I told you so, hypocritical Christians. That it will be fuel for the enemy's work and for unbelievers to not to repent and to turn away further from God. And other believers may stumble in their faith. I've sadly been a Christian long enough to see so many people turn from the Lord. Some who most likely were never saved and simply were attending church because it's what they were raised in, or it's what was a social scene for them, or it met a need for a period of their lives. But often, some who were genuinely saved and who backslide and who walk away for a time, for whom the trials of fire are too much and they capitulate. And every single time, the effects are huge and widespread. Far more than that individual. And we live in such an individualistic society. We think, well, I'm going to make this decision because it's my life and I get to make this decision. Well, absolutely, it's your life and you get to make that decision. But please don't be so naive as to think that the decisions you make only affect you. They affect everybody around you. They affect everyone in your circles, everyone you interact with. The ramifications of every decision you make are far greater than you know. You're more important than you realize. And we need to be aware that when we stumble, that there are effects on others, and when we love and when we do well and when we are faithful, then there's effects there as well. So the effects of Tyre falling was on the inhabitants of the coast. They were to be still. Their trade is going to cease. The merchants of Sidon. Tyre is so often linked with Sidon. The reason for that is that Sidon was originally where Tyre came from. That Sidon initially had this colony of which Tyre was, and then Tyre eventually became greater than the Sidon who had mothered, if you would, Tyre. Tyre surpassed Sidon. And so it says, the merchants of Sidon who crossed the sea have filled you. So the merchants of Sidon would be those who came from Sidon, the people of Tyre, who are these merchants, and they have filled all these inhabitants of the coast. They have provided for them, they have traded with them, they have given them all the things that they rely on, and boom, it's over. Do you know how much, just going back to my previous point, just think how much life would be impacted in America if China fell as a nation. Just because we rely on them so much. Hugely. Far more than the average person realizes. The prices of everything would all shoot up. It would affect everybody's life in America. And here, these people, their lives are going to be impacted because they have relied so hugely on these merchants. Verse 3, and on many waters your revenue was the grain of Shihor, and the harvest of the Nile, and you were the merchant of the nations. And so this is the first of a couple of references to Egypt. Shihor is on the Nile, and that is a part of Egypt. And they were famous for their grain. They produced grain and they traded and sold. And now, because the central hub has gone down, their own trade is going to be affected as well. Be ashamed, O Sidon, for the sea has spoken, the stronghold of the sea, saying, I have neither labored nor given birth. I have neither reared young men nor brought up young women. And so Sidon is the one who is in shame, because Sidon is the one that mothered Tyre, as it were. Tyre had, like I said, came from Sidon, and so Sidon is now ashamed because Tyre has fallen. And so it's, I've neither labored nor given birth, I've neither reared young men nor brought up young women. No, what Sidon did is produce merchants, and the merchants have gone. In other words, their focus was on the material side of things rather than on producing a nation of great people or anything of that kind of sort. And so the result of that is that they now have shame, because what they produced was this merchant center, which has now fallen. Verse 5, when the report comes to Egypt, they will be in anguish over the report of Tyre. Egypt was going to be hugely affected. Just by the way, geographically, if you've got Tyre here, then Sidon is Sidon is to the north, above them, and Egypt's down to the south. So Egypt is below Tyre, okay? So when all of these nations are attacking and they're coming in, like the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and what have you, when they're coming from the north, the northeast, doing it from your way. They're coming from the northeast. So Egypt had a buffer. Egypt had a buffer. If anyone was going to come to Egypt, they had to go through Tyre and Sidon. But if Tyre has fallen, then Egypt's going to fall too. They have no protection anymore. And secondly, obviously, there is the whole of the export and the trading and the merchants issue. And so Egypt is going to be in anguish when they hear about Tyre. They know that means trouble for them. And so verse 6, cross over to Tarshish, wail, O inhabitants of the coast. The crossing to Tarshish is going to these various colonies that have been set up, and there seems to be a need to flee. If they found out about the news while in Cyprus, then they can't go back because the city's been destroyed. So where are they going to go? They're going to cross over. They're going to go to Tarshish. They're going to go to these various ports, and they're going to escape. They cannot go home. And thus there will be much wailing. Now, verse 7 is the last verse of this little section. Is this your exultant city, whose origin is from days of old, whose feet carried her to settle far away? And this seems to be a sort of an ironic taunt. Oh, where's Tyre? Where's this great city of Tyre? Anyone seen Tyre? And the idea here is that, that there's almost this mocking that is going on. Is this your exultant city? Exultant here would be speaking of joy. This is a place where people were generally happy. Why? Because there was wealth. It was a prosperous nation, right? And it was a nation that was not only exultant, but it was a nation from antiquity. Now, we think of Isaiah as being a long time ago, right? And we think of the time of Christ being a long, long time ago. Best part of 2,000 years ago, right? At the time that Isaiah wrote this prophecy, Tyre was already 2,300 years old. That's when it had been established. Now, that's an old place. Over 2,000 years, this place had been in existence. You see, the problem is that we have very limited lifespans. And so what we do is we look back a few hundred years and we go, man, that's ancient history. But we look in our own lifetime, we look to the future, and we just presume that everything's going to go on and go on and go on and go on. And I've said this a few times in Isaiah. I know I'm kind of repeating myself to those who come regularly, but it is an interesting theme that keeps coming up in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament. And that is something that when Daniel writes a little bit later on, he's going to really focus on this theme from Isaiah, which is that God raises up nations and God brings down nations. Do you think that the people of Tyre, going off to trade in Cyprus, with a nation that has existed for nearly 2,500 years, a place that has been a center of trade, that has brought them great prosperity, it has made them a people who enjoy life and all the pleasures that life brings. Do you think that they considered that Tyre simply wouldn't exist to come home to? I've joked about this in the past, but there are books out there that you can get that are along the lines of the role of America in end-time Bible prophecy. And I've joked about this many times because I can write that book for you now. It's not there. It's just not there. And speaking as a Brit, England isn't there either. These nations that are so central, I mean, Great Britain is called Great Britain because of the great empire all over the world that it had. And now we had, when I was growing up, the superpowers of the world were America and Russia, and then the Soviet Union all broke up, and America is this incredibly powerful and influential nation. You think about it, the whole of the world economy rests on the dollar. Used to be on gold, it's on the dollar now. America is like Tyre in that so much of the world economy rests upon it. If the dollar falls, the world falls. The whole world economy goes down. We're seeing, hearing stories of, Venezuela where money is just becoming worthless because of the incredible rate of inflation. Not that many years previously, the same thing happened in Zimbabwe. If it happened in America, that would affect the whole world because the whole world rests on the dollar. And we think that this nation's just going to go on and go on and go on and go on and go on. And then we look at Romans 1, and I'm not going to go through that again because we did that in a previous passage in Isaiah. But you see, in Romans 1, it speaks about a sexual revolution, then a homosexual revolution, and then about people losing their minds. And this is God judging a nation at the end. This is God bringing judgment upon the world because it's coming to an end. And there is no guarantee that our children, that our grandchildren, will have an America to grow up in. There's no guarantee this nation will exist. We think that everything is just going to go on. This message is so relevant to us because it's speaking to a nation that had prosperity, that a nation that was significant, that all the other nations relied upon. Tyre was so like America in its day. And then, boom, it's gone. And they wail. And they lament, and they have to flee, and they have to turn to nations they would never have turned to. They have to go off to colonies that they considered less than them. One day, we might have a wall on the southern border, completely, and people might be trying to get over it to get to the south. It's perfectly possible. We have no idea what's going to happen. We simply know that God will rise up and bring down nations as he so wills. And I think that this mocking in verse 7, your exultant city, origin from days of old, whose feet carried her to settle far away. She was a nation that moved, that had transport, that could go where it wanted. And all of that is coming to an end. Now we've established how relevant this text is. Everything that follows is going to be that much more important. Who has purposed this? Who is it that's caused this? Why has it happened? Who has purposed this against Tyre, the bestower of crowns, whose merchants were princes, whose traders were the honoured of the earth? Again, this great nation that gave honour to others, that had its most powerful people, its princes, its leaders, were traders. Isn't that funny in this modern day age that we live in an era where a businessman has become president? Like him or loathe him, I don't do politics from the pulpit, but isn't it interesting that we live in a time where basically businessmen and corporations, more accurately, are the powers, the princes of this nation, exactly like Tyre. And look, it says, who has purposed this against Tyre, whose merchants were princes? So they're the powerful ones. They trade and they have power. They give honor to people. That's the bestowing of crowns. Who on earth can bring down a nation like that? I think we know the answer, don't we? Let's go and have a look just to be sure. Verse 9, here it is. Yahweh of Hosts. That name, that terminology we keep seeing in Isaiah whenever it refers to the might of God, whenever it refers to his power, his authority, his sovereignty over nations, his sovereignty over the seen and the unseen. He is Yahweh of Hosts, Yahweh of armies, and he is the one who has purposed it. That look at the why. This is what speaks to us, this is what speaks to our day, and this is what speaks to this nation. Yahweh of Hosts has purposed it to defile the pompous pride of all glory. The pompous pride of all glory. To dishonor all the honored of the earth. This is one of the most central themes of the book of Isaiah that we have seen again and again and again. That God sees the proud and he brings them down, and he sees the humble and he lifts them up. This is something that we're going to come across in 1 Peter and in James. We spoke about it last week. We spoke about it for the first 5-6 chapters of Isaiah, and we'll be talking about it again and again and again, because it is everywhere. It is everywhere. And these are themes that the other later prophets pick up on. We referenced last time about how Nebuchadnezzar ends up this proud king who has a statue in his image and bow down and worship. And then what happens? He's eating grass like a cow. He's humbled. And the reason that God has brought down Tyre is because Tyre was proud. And so God takes those whom the earth honors and he dishonors them. I'm going to say something a bit scary, a little bit brave here, okay? Let me preempt this by saying, I obviously love America because I've chosen to live here. I'm hoping to get very shortly my green card to stay here. So I have clearly nothing against America. I'm welcome to go back to England whenever I like, and I choose to be and live and work here and to serve God here. So I like America. Okay. That said, there are times when, particularly in churches, American nationalism gets to a level that is very ungodly. Very ungodly. America, this great nation, let's wave our flags and celebrate we're our best nation in the world, all of this. My goodness! If the things that American Christians say, sometimes in church, sometimes in sermons, if those things were on the pages of scriptures coming out of the mouth of a Nebuchadnezzar, coming out of the mouth of the prince of Tyre, then we'd be here saying, oh, look at that terrible pride. Look at them glorying in themselves and glorying in their riches and glorying in their might. But then when it comes to America, oh, we get a free pass because we're Christians. It's disgraceful. And there's no place for it. There's no place for jingoism, as we used to call it in England, for this kind of nationalistic pride. You know what? There are lots of things in America to celebrate, and let's celebrate them. And there's nothing wrong with being proud of your flag, and there's nothing wrong with being happy with many of the blessings that you have as part of this nation, and there's many things in this nation to celebrate. I am not knocking that. I am simply saying we have a text in front of us that it's my duty under God Almighty to preach, which clearly says that here is a nation that was pompous in its pride, saying, look how mighty I am and look how great I am, and I cannot teach that text in America without saying, I've heard that in the churches from American Christians multiple times. How could I not say that? And we've got to be careful, because pride comes before a fall. Us lifting up a nation means God having to bring it down. America, if it has any good in it, it comes as a gift from God. And he should be honored, and he should be glorified, and he should be worshipped. And I think that the worst form of American nationalism comes at the hands of those who are religious, but perhaps not saved. Those who've been raised in churches and think, link America and God and politics all into the same pot and think it's all so wonderful. But they don't bow the knee before Jesus. And so America becomes almost godlike. Let's be careful. Because God is in the habit of dishonoring those who are honored in the earth. There is only one who will ultimately be honored in the whole earth, and that is Jesus Christ. And if we honor other things above him, then God will dishonor them. Be they nations, be they people, be they concepts, be they, whatever. We need to be aware that God is in the business of defiling pompous pride. One little note you might be interested in: the Hebrew word for glory rhymes with the Hebrew word for hosts. Isaiah is reveling almost in the poetry of this, that Yahweh of Hosts will take away, their glory. He will take away their glory. And so they will be brought into contempt And verse 10 repeats that phrase, cross over. We saw that in verse 6. Cross over your land like the Nile, O daughter of Tarshish. Those who have come from these trading cities, they will have to flee. They will have to cross over. They will perhaps form independent colonies. The colonies that were part of Tyre, that were under Tyre's control, are no longer there. And they become independent. Some have suggested that. But either way, there is crossing over, there is leaving, there is fleeing, there is no land to return to. The phrase, there is no restraint anymore, is what suggests independence of colonies. That this great city, this great place of Tyre, no longer has control over these other places. There's no more restraint. And so there is this crossing over by other nations. Other people are going elsewhere as well. Verse 11. He has stretched out his hand over the sea, and he has shaken the kingdoms. That stretching out of God's hand, there's a great Bible study in that if you're ever bored one day. Just seeing how God stretches out his hand. He stretches out his hand. And more often than not, it's showing his power, it's showing his might, and it's in the form of judgment. And he's stretching out his hand over the sea, and he has shaken the kingdoms. Now, there's two things going on here. Tyre, as we've all seen, is on the sea. It's a place of the sea. There's this coastline. They're doing trading up and down the coastline. These Tarshishes everywhere, and they're trading, and there's all this going on, right? And the sea is central to the geography of what's happening and the dynamics of what's happening. At the same time, biblically, and we've seen this a couple of times in Isaiah already, the sea is so often symbolic as a place of demonic activity. This goes way back to the book of Job. Job begins at the beginning of the book with Satan, right? Satan is there saying, he goes before God and goes, hey, where have you been? Well, I've been roaming the earth. Hey, have you seen Job? And so we have that start with Satan being the one who is given authority under the sovereign hand of God to cause harm to Job, to take from him and then ultimately to cause harm to him physically as well. And then when God comes and explains everything at the end, he actually, you think at first glance, he doesn't reference Satan. He doesn't explain it. So how on earth did anyone know to write chapter 1? Well, you see, the answer is that God did explain it. But he explained it in the form of Leviathan. Leviathan, in the book of Job, is a representation of Satan. And that goes right the way through to the book of Revelation, where it talks about the dragon coming out of the sea. That this concept of sea monsters is always linked with the demonic. Now, there's all sorts of things that's now picked up from this chapter by the later prophet Jonah. And in the story of Jonah, we have Tarshish. And in the story of Jonah, we have a sea creature as well. And so a lot of this dynamic is kind of picked up on there. And maybe that's best saved for a study of Jonah. But nonetheless, I want us to see that the sea is a place that has demonic overtones. And so what is being said here, as well as literally, God is in control of this geographical region and the sea and all the trading, but that God is sovereign, he is Lord of hosts over all the kingdoms in an earthly sense, but also in the kingdoms in a heavenly sense. That whenever there is a nation falling, there is a God falling. Whenever there is a nation that rises up, there is a God rising up. And the ancients all recognized that, and we tend to think of that as kind of backward thinking, but everything in Scripture points to that. We see Daniel and the archangel Michael coming to him and having to battle with the prince of Persia. We see in Deuteronomy a reference to the time of the Tower of Babel and the distributing of all the nations to the sons of God. That God said, okay, angelic beings, you have the nations. I'm going to go start a new one afresh. Abraham, come here. Chapter 12 of Genesis. And so God is saying, and this is, I think, why it's so significant in this particular oracle, because it's the last one of the oracles, that God is, so much of this is summing up. God is saying, I'm in charge of the sea. Physically, trading, nations, kingdoms. But I'm also in charge of the sea. The demons, the gods, the false gods that are worshipped, the demonic entities that demand this and that from people. I'm sovereign over it all. And I will rise up and I will bring down, and I am in control because I am Yahweh of Hosts. That's what's going on here. And so he stretched out his hand, he's shaking the kingdoms. Yahweh has given command concerning Canaan, to destroy its strongholds. And so in all of this land, in all of this region, God is the one who can bring down strongholds. Places that simply don't look like they could ever fall. Verse 12. Verse 12. And he said, you will no more exult, O oppressed virgin daughter of Sidon. That's a lovely expression. Okay, and that's going to become relevant in a minute. They were the virgin daughter of Sidon. They were birthed by Sidon as a daughter in purity. The beginning of Tyre was a perfectly good thing. But then they became powerful. Hence, look at the previous expression, you will no more exult. They exalted themselves, this pompous pride, right? So they were pure, and they were born, they had a small beginning, and then they exalted themselves. You know what's going to go on the parallel with the virgin here, don't you? That she goes from being humble to being exalting, and she's going to go from being a virgin to being impure. That's what's going to happen here. And it says, arise, cross over to Cyprus. And again, there is this crossing over reference for a third time. They can't go back to Tyre. It's going to be destroyed. And so what's going to happen is they're going to go elsewhere. But even there, you will have no rest. In other words, your suffering doesn't end even with the destruction of Tyre. So verse 13. Everything has been so far all about the fact that Tyre is going to be destroyed, the ramifications of that for the trade in the area, and why God is doing it. But what we haven't heard yet is how he's going to do it. That's what verse 13 tells us. Behold, the land of the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans are, as we've seen already, the Babylonians. It's the same people. The Chaldeans are the Babylonians. And the Babylonians are the ones who are now going to come in. This is the people that was not. Assyria destined it for wild beasts. They erected their siege towers, they stripped her palaces bare, and they made her a ruin. Okay, let's break that down slowly. I think we have an inclusio here in verse 13. The first phrase, behold the land of the Chaldeans. And then the last phrase, they erected their siege tower, that refers to the Chaldeans. So the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, they are the ones that we're to look at, we're to behold. And they are erecting towers and they're stripping her palaces bare. Who is the she? Go back in a few verses, look at the previous verse and see the she. The she is the virgin daughter of Sidon. The she is Tyre. So it is saying that the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, are stripping the palaces of Tyre bare and they're making her a ruin. In other words, it is the Babylonians who are the ones who are destroying Tyre. That's how God is going to do it. But that then leaves us with this bizarre phrase in the middle. This is the people that was not. Assyria destined it for wild beasts. What on earth is that talking about then? How are the Babylonians the nation that was not? Well, the answer is quite simple, historically speaking. There were two great Babylonian empires in the Old Testament. The first one rose up at about the time of Abraham and the patriarchs around that period of time. And they rose up, the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, and they had an empire. And their empire was destroyed by the Assyrians. Hence the reference here. The Assyrians destined it for wild beasts. And I love that phrase. They destined it. It's like, oh, you think you're so great, Babylonians? Boom, you're going to just be a place for wild beasts. You're gone. You're finished. Right? And then the Assyrians come in. Who took out the Assyrians? The Babylonians. Second empire. So the Assyrians come in and they just wipe out Babylon, and the empire's gone. And then what happens? The second empire of Babylon rises up, and they take out the Assyrians. This is a reminder, just again and again and again. God raises up, God brings down. God raises up, God brings down. You think, that nation's never going to fall. It falls. That nation's gone forever. It rises back up. Because you know what? Where is Babylon today? Babylon doesn't exist. It's not a city of Babylon today. Where it was located is in modern-day Iraq. Modern-day Iraq is hardly the center of trade. But the Bible says that in the end times, it will be the world center of trade. Not America. Babylon. And God raises up and brings down. And he raises up and he brings down. And the message for us all in the midst of this is, do not trust in your nation. And do not trust in the things of your nation. And do not trust in your armies. And do not trust in your military. I may be treading on toes here, but you just can't trust in these things. Because God can bring them all down in a heartbeat, in a moment. Because he is sovereign and we're not. And so, it is the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, who are the ones who God will use to bring to an end the proud nation of Tyre. Verse 14 is basically an inclusio. It refers, as verse 1, to at the beginning, wail, O ships of Tarshish, for your stronghold is laid waste. All the traders will mourn because that central hub of trade has now fallen. Then in verse 15, something very bizarre happens. And everything changes. Look at verse 15. In that day, little word about in that day. We've been talking about this the last few weeks. In that day, in the first 5 chapters of Isaiah, referred to the day of the Lord. It referred to the end time judgment. And then going on from there, in that day, in that day, in that day, always referred to the end time, to the day of the Lord. Then, when the oracle shifted to the immediate future, we've seen this phrase, in that day, referring to the similar concept at a different time. That a time in a day of judgment where God brings judgment and then ultimately restores. That's what the day of the Lord's all about. And that's what's going on here. And so in this day of judgment, at this time for Tyre, it says in that day Tyre will be forgotten for 70 years. Like the days of one king. So for 70 years, the long reign of a king perhaps, the Tyre will just be forgotten. It'll be insignificant. It'll go. And then look what happens. At the end of 70 years, it will happen to Tyre as in the song of the prostitute. And we'll get to that song in a minute. But I want us to understand this. There's going to be 70 years, and Tyre has been destroyed, and it looks like it's over. And then after 70 years, everything's going to change. That is why we had that central reference in verse 14 where we had, remember inclusios, I always say to this to you, when you have inclusios, these bookends, it's always what's in the middle that counts. Like when you go to get your burger. You get a bun on the top and a bun on the bottom, but it's really the stuff in the middle that makes a burger, right? So it's the stuff in the middle that counts. So you've got the Chaldeans, and you've got the Chaldeans, and there in the middle, there is this whole bit of that verse about how the Assyrians just laid them to waste. They were gone. They were finished. And then here they are, back again, doing what they do, bringing down Tyre. In the same way, Tyre is destroyed, and it's gone. It's over. It's a waste. Everyone's wailing, mourning for 70 years, and then what happens? We're going to see, but there's going to be a change. And so in the same way that God brings down, God raises up. Something looks like it's gone forever. Boom, it comes back. God raises up as much as he brings down. So that's what's going on there. Note, by the way, that the 70 years is a parallel with the 70 years in captivity of Judah. that Judah's taken into captivity for 70 years by the Babylonians. But what happens is that the Babylonian captivity ends because the Babylonians themselves are defeated. That has an effect on Judah, but it also has an effect on Tyre as well. The 70 years, by the way, aren't exactly parallel. Tyre falls before Judah, and then because of the Medo-Persians, it takes a little while longer for the captivity of Judah to end as well. So they're not paralleled exactly, but it is the same length of time. Okay? And there is obviously significance in that, because when he's going to talk to Israel about what's going to happen to them, what has he told them about Tyre? That Tyre had 70 years, and then God lifted them back up again. Right? So let's have a look at what happens. There is a song of a prostitute. Any of you songwriters, you might want to make a little song about this. Take a harp and go about the city, O forgotten prostitute. Make sweet melodies, sing many songs, that you may be remembered. This is a comedic, ironic song. It is a song of a prostitute. And the prostitute is basically going out into the city and singing and making songs to try and draw trade. The idea is that there would be a prostitute, and the prostitute would have business, and then would stop being a prostitute. And then, because of hunger, would have to go back to all that she could do. Which, if you think about it, is just this really tragic thing. Because you have someone who trades on their beauty, and then they get older, and they don't have what they used to have. But they have nothing else to return to. So in a sense, it's a song of making melody and making song, but there's this undercurrent of sadness in that this person is going back to their sin. They're going back to this, and they're having to kind of draw attention to themselves in different ways because they're not what they used to be. And what God is saying is he's saying, hey, you compromised. You, virgin daughter of Sidon, were pure, and then you became proud, and you became corrupted, and I had to bring you down. But this is what's going to happen. You're going to go back. Back to purity? No, back to being a harlot. Back to trading, back to thinking you're proud, back to doing this, back to doing that. Going back to your old ways. And so God is raising up Tyre as much as he brought Tyre down. And he's not raising up Tyre to do anything other than the sinful stuff that Tyre did before. How bizarre. But then look what follows. Verse 17. At the end of 70 years, Yahweh will visit Tyre, and she will return to her wages and will prostitute herself with all the kingdoms of the world on the face of the earth. And so her trade will go even further than before. All the established nations that were known at that time, they're all going to be trading with Tyre. And you say to yourself, God, why would you do that? Why would you take a nation and allow it to be corrupt and greedy, and then bring it down from that greed, and then rise it up and then say, go sing the song with the prostitutes again. And go and trade with all those kingdoms again. And go and prostitute yourself, and be immoral, and be greedy, and have all the prosperity, and all the issues of pride and self-exaltation that you had before. God, why would you do that? Verse 18 tells us why. And just think how dramatic a shift this is. Her merchandise and her wages will be holy to Yahweh. Now you have to see the contrast here. That she's just sung the song of the prostitute. She's just been referred to as a prostitute. We've just been told in no uncertain terms that she's going back to doing what she did before, and there's nothing good about it, right? And now, in the very next phrase, in the very next breath, we're told that her merchandise and her wages will be holy to the Lord. But notice what it says. It's her merchandise and her wages. It is the things that she sells and the money that she sells it for that God is going to make holy, not her. Now, what does that mean? We're going to see. It will not be stored or hoarded, but her merchandise will supply abundant food and fine clothing for those who dwell before Yahweh. In other words, God is saying, you may not be made pure, but I will have pure purposes for your trade. For I'm going to use the things that you make to minister to my people. That's what God's saying. I'm going to use you. And so, that's how the prophecy ends. Now, that's a little confusing to some of us, so you may want to turn to Ezra, the book of Ezra, chapter 3. So go back from Isaiah, if you're not familiar with the Old Testament layout. You've got Proverbs and Psalms, and then you've got Job, and they're all big books. And just before Job, you have Esther and Nehemiah, and before that, you have Ezra. So we need to turn, if we can, to Ezra chapter 3. In Ezra chapter 3, the book of Nehemiah, let's take a step back. The book of Nehemiah deals with the rebuilding of Jerusalem after the exile. The book of Ezra deals with the rebuilding of the temple after the exile. So the Babylonians come in, they destroy the temple in Jerusalem, and now the Jews are taken into captivity, and after 70 years they return, and now everything is in ruins. And so Nehemiah deals with the building of the city, and Ezra deals with the rebuilding of the temple. And so we have in chapter 3 the rebuilding of the altar, the rebuilding of the temple. And I want you to look at this. Verse 7 of chapter 3. So they gave money to the masons and the carpenters, and food and drink and oil to the Sidonians and the Tyrians to bring cedar trees from Lebanon to the sea, to Joppa, according to the grant that they had from Cyrus, king of Persia. Cyrus, king of Persia, made a decree that people would trade with the Jews and help them and give them stuff to allow them to rebuild their city and to rebuild their temple. That a Gentile king gives a decree that the people of Israel must be helped and served. And so, for good wages, the good merchandise, so in other words, they get a cut price deal, and they get the best stuff from the people of Tyre and Sidon. And they have it to rebuild the temple. So God allows the nation to rise up again for his sovereign purposes. This, in a nutshell, is Romans 9. God raises up and God brings down. God molds. He is the potter and we're the clay. And some things he makes for good purposes and some he makes for ignoble purposes. There are things that God makes that he says, this one's mine, I'm going to use it for my glory. And there are some that God creates, like Pharaoh, that he will use for his glory, but not for Pharaoh's glory and not for Pharaoh's good. But God has a purpose and a use. And what is, I think, like, you got to remember, this is the last in a long line of oracles we've been doing for many, many months. And it ends with God categorically showing his sovereignty over all the nations, all the kingdoms, seen and unseen, in the unseen realm and on the earth. And he is able to lift up, he is able to bring down, he's able to lift back up again. And he does it all according to his purposes. And it's all for the purposes of his people. That's how the Isaiah passage ended. It ends with they will supply abundant food and fine clothing for those who dwell before Yahweh. It's for his people. God is bringing about all things for his glory. And because we're saved, he's working all things together for our good. That everything that happens is working out in a way that benefits us. Because, as I keep trying to say to you, the glory of God is the best thing that we can have. There's nothing better. So for God to glorify himself is our best. If God, as we were talking about this morning, puts us through a period of suffering and trials so that we might learn to trust him and to walk before him and to honor him in the way that we live in the midst of trials, then he is glorified, and that is for our best. That is better for us than for him to give us a comfortable life with riches and all the things that we want and everything being a success. It's far better for us. Why? Because we get to see the glory of God in our lives. Remember for John in his gospel how central glory was. That the glory of God is revealed through the person of Jesus Christ. And there's that central moment in John's gospel where Judas is exposed as the one who is going to betray him. And he goes out into the night to betray Jesus. And then Jesus turns to the other disciples and he says, "Now the time has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." That was the best life that Jesus could have lived with the cross. That was his best. We have to understand that. Jesus didn't just have a terrible life, a worse life for our sakes, though he did humble himself for our sakes. But it was the best life that he could have had, because as Philippians chapter 2 tells us, he was humbled that he would then be super exalted and receive the name above all other names, before which every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And we have just got to come to terms with this concept that the best thing that we could ever have, the best life that we could ever have, is a life where God is glorified through us. And we as Christians, we have to make a decision. And this is what the whole of this section has been, way back to chapter 13. This is really what it all comes down to. Is that you want to place your trust in other nations, in other things. You want to look outside of God to get you what you want, to get you your trade, to get you your riches, to get you your wealth, to get you your glory, so that you can live this comfortable life where you're exalted, where you're comfortable, where you have what you want, where you're wealthy. All of these things that all of these nations had. That people were turning to them and looking to them because of their glory in whatever way their glory was. And it is a lesser glory than the glory of God. And the message to Israel through it all is God gave them their glory. And God will take their glory away. And he'll give their glory back. Just go straight to him. Just go straight to him and receive the greater glory. When we live life our own way, when we seek satisfaction outside of God, then what we're doing, according to Jeremiah, is we're drinking from broken cisterns. We're drinking dirty water, pond water, puddle water. When God has a well of living water for us. The best that we have in this life, not just in the next, in this life, the best we have is the glory of God. And if that glory comes through fire and through tears and through trials and through suffering, then we've got to embrace it. We have to decide this day that as Christians, we are going to seek the glory of God and not the glory of ourselves. That we are going to trust in him and not trust in the glories of another. That what he has is the best for us. It is the greatest glory, the greatest good, because he is sovereign over all and he works all things together for the good of his people. And we will be fools to trust in anyone else. That's the message of the oracles of Isaiah. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for your goodness. We thank you for your glory. And Lord, we pray that we might see it, that we might see your glory, we might see who you are, your character, your faithfulness, and see that working through our lives as your Holy Spirit works in us and molds us. That we might be faithful, that we might be loving, that we might be kind, that we might be merciful, just as you have been with us. And Lord, in trials, may we hold firm, may we trust you, and may we trust in who you are. And may we try and walk as you walked in your trials. And may we never turn away from you to place our trust in false gods and false kingdoms. But may our hope be in you and in you alone, we pray. Amen.